He didn't stop because it felt good. He stopped because something inside him was dying, and no one else could hear it but him. There was no applause, no celebration, just the quiet decision to withdraw from the noise, to feel the fire again, to remember what it meant to carry himself like a man. Zeno of Citium lost everything in a shipwreck. The ocean took his trade, his plans, his identity. But in that collapse, he didn't rebuild what he lost. He built something that had never existed before. Stoicism wasn't born in success. It was born in silence. Just like the man who looks at his compulsions, not with shame, but with clarity, and finally chooses to say, enough. Nofap isn't about denial. It's about reconstruction. It's not a rule. It's a reckoning. When a man can't say no to his urges, he's not living. He's leaking. Epictetus said that mastery begins where compulsion ends. A man owned by his habits is already enslaved, and most men have no idea what they're giving away every time they reach for escape, every time they release, thinking it's pleasure, but it's just the absence of presence. The real cost of compulsion isn't pleasure, it's erosion. It's how the body becomes numb to discipline, how the mind begins to tolerate self-disrespect, and how a man forgets that dignity begins in private. The magnetic man isn't loud. He isn't chasing. He isn't pretending to be strong. He simply stopped running from himself. What draws people to him isn't tension, it's peace. It's the feeling that he's no longer negotiating with his own energy. He carries the flame inside. He knows where it is. He knows how to hold it. You feel it when he walks into the room, when he looks at you, not with hunger, but with presence. This isn't suppression. Zeno didn't teach suppression. He taught structure. He taught how to hold the storm in your chest and not let it rule your life. That's what Nofap really is. It's not a movement. It's a decision. To rebuild the keel after the shipwreck. To become the man who no longer leaks. To restore the foundation, not with noise, but with stillness. If you've ever felt drained after pleasure, if you've ever felt smaller after giving in, if you've ever felt like the fire left the room every time you touch that screen or chase that fantasy, then this video isn't about advice. It's about memory. The memory of the man you were before you gave your strength away one silent night at a time. You didn't lose your magnetism. You leaked it. But you can rebuild, not by running harder, but by stopping, by withdrawing, like Zeno, to feel the fire again, and by realizing this isn't about what you quit. It's about what you finally remembered. You thought you were relieving pressure, but you were emptying yourself, slowly, quietly. Over time, that small habit, done in silence, done in hiding, became a ritual of forgetting. Not forgetting her, not forgetting the pain, forgetting you. That feeling afterward, that shallow numbness, it wasn't peace. It was absence. The absence of dignity, of direction, of energy you didn't even know you were leaking. Nofap isn't about morality. It's about memory. It's about the moment you realized that what you called pleasure was a transaction you kept losing. A cheap relief that always left you more restless, more invisible to yourself, because what you were chasing wasn't the high. It was an escape from the weight you carry but never voice. That pressure inside you, that ache you keep soothing with pixels and empty touch, isn't lust. It's loneliness. It's rejection you never processed. It's grief without a name. Men don't always break with noise. Sometimes they erode in routine, in repetition, in the quiet compromise of reaching for false comfort instead of holding themselves through the storm. Every time you seek dopamine without purpose, you weaken your edge. You dull the mind that was built to choose. You abandon the part of you meant to lead, and you begin to tolerate things you once would have confronted. Disrespect, emotional chaos, being overlooked. There's science to it. Your brain, overstimulated, stops discerning. The prefrontal cortex, the part that governs decision, clarity, confidence, begins to go dark. But this isn't about the science. It's about the soul. A man overstimulated is a man disoriented. He walks into the world unsure, overthinking, underfeeling, unable to command attention because he no longer commands himself. Imagine a vessel with a crack, barely noticeable. Water doesn't burst out. It seeps, quiet, constant. That's what compulsive release does. You don't notice it after one time, but weeks become years, and soon you're standing in a life that no longer reflects the man you once swore you'd become. You don't feel broken. You feel off, detached, like something in you stopped showing up, and you're too distracted to mourn it. And so you scroll, and click and swipe, looking for the next thing to make you feel alive again, while silently betraying the only force that ever made you magnetic. Your presence. Not your words, not your looks, your presence. And presence cannot grow in a man who is constantly leaking the energy meant to build his soul. This is not about guilt. This is about gravity. And it begins the moment you realize what you thought was release was really your slow disappearance. You don't notice it at first. The burnout doesn't come with fire. It comes with fog. You stop feeling sharp. You stop feeling needed. You still function, but something in you feels unplugged. You laugh when you're supposed to. You nod during conversation. But deep down, you're watching yourself live instead of living. That's the kind of exhaustion most men don't have words for, and Nofap forces you to face it. When you live on dopamine loops, your internal friction disappears. That edge, the thing that made you decisive, aware, silently dangerous, gets smoothed out by routine gratification. You're not chasing sex, you're trying to feel alive. But it comes at the cost of your presence, and without presence, you become invisible. To women, to your kids, to yourself, you begin to tolerate being ignored. You start accepting emotional leftovers, passive disrespect, conversations where your voice doesn't matter. You tell yourself it's not a big deal, that you're being mature. But really, you're tired. Tired in a way that no sleep can fix. Tired because you've been draining the very energy meant to make you magnetic. The masculine core doesn't burn with noise, it burns with clarity. And clarity dies in a man who is constantly numbing his instincts. This kind of burnout looks like apathy, but it's not. It's depletion. There was a man who once led his home with quiet presence. After his divorce, he thought the sadness came from loss. But the truth hit him when he looked in the mirror and realized he hadn't really grieved. He had just gone numb. He wasn't mourning her. He was mourning how far he'd fallen from himself. Years of private ritual, late-night comfort, daily escape, all of it had dulled his edge. And what remained was a shadow of someone who used to lead, but now just waited. You don't become magnetic by forcing charisma. You become magnetic by remembering how still you used to be. Before the craving, before the click, before the empty release. That stillness, that masculine gravity, can only return when you stop burning your essence for comfort. Because the most powerful men aren't loud. They don't chase attention. They rebuild their energy after long winters of numbness. And when they return, they don't need to prove it. You just feel it. That's what Nofap becomes. Not a trend, not a rule, but a quiet reckoning with the ways you've traded away your fire. And a vow, spoken in silence, to never burn out like that again. It starts where you least expect it. Not in your voice, not in your posture, but in your eyes. Around the second month of holding your energy, something shifts. You don't scan rooms the same way. You don't chase every curve. You stop devouring with your gaze. You begin to see, not just look. Your eyes slow down. Your thoughts follow. You're no longer driven by hunger. You're driven by clarity. You used to seek something, approval, stimulation, distraction. With every glance, it was unconscious, automatic. But after weeks without release, that autopilot breaks. You stop being pulled outward. You anchor inward, and the world notices, even if it doesn't know why. Your eye contact changes. It deepens. It lingers without needing. You're not asking for attention anymore. You're observing. You're holding ground. You've become rare. The science confirms it. Dopamine receptors start to normalize. Focus sharpens. Impulse weakens. But what matters isn't the biology. It's the presence. When a man no longer seeks with his eyes, people feel it. Women notice, not because you try harder, but because you've stopped trying altogether. You're not scanning to feed a craving. You're grounded, composed, fully here. There's power in that stillness, power in not needing to look, power in choosing what deserves your attention and letting the rest pass like smoke. That's the kind of gaze that commands respect without asking, not because it's aggressive, but because it's contained, like someone who could move but chooses not to. When your eyes stop searching, your energy speaks louder than your words. It says, I'm not chasing, I'm building. It says, I remember who I am. And in a world full of men who stare, the one who sees becomes unforgettable. There's a quiet shame most men carry, and it doesn't come from failure. It comes from the need to be seen and the fear of asking for it. You've been taught to soften your voice, to shrink your posture, to not make anyone uncomfortable with your presence. And over time, you began to apologize, not with words, but with your energy, for taking up space, for having standards, for wanting respect. But something changes when you stop leaking your fire. You stop performing. You stop proving. And slowly, you stop apologizing. Because real magnetic men don't ask to be noticed. They walk into a room with the weight of a man who doesn't need to be. There's no desperation, no hidden demand, just stillness that commands silence. When you hold your energy, it recalibrates your posture, not just physically, but emotionally. You don't posture to impress. You don't speak to convince. You simply are. And that shift, from performative to gravitational, isn't loud. It's grounded. People begin to respond to you differently. Not because you act alpha, but because your energy says, I no longer beg for permission to be here. It's subtle, but powerful, and it's built in the quiet. The man who chases validation still belongs to his craving. The man who reclaims attention through presence, he belongs to himself. That's what Epictetus meant when he said, you become what you give your attention to. If you give it to fantasy, to approval, to quick release, you become hollow. But when your attention turns inward, toward order, toward stillness, your dignity reawakens. You no longer wait to be respected. You carry it. You become the man who knows when to speak and when to walk away. You become the man who doesn't raise his voice because he doesn't need to. You become the man whose silence says, I remember my worth, even if you don't. And once you taste that level of self-respect, you never give it up again. You didn't change your haircut. You didn't buy new clothes. You didn't try to be more interesting. And yet something shifted. She looked at you and paused, not because of how you spoke, but because of how you didn't. Not because of what you said, but because of what you no longer needed to prove. You didn't need to flirt. You didn't need to impress. There was something else, something in your stillness that made her wonder, not if you wanted her, but who you had become. That's what happens when you stop leaking your masculine charge. You develop an energetic boundary that speaks louder than charm. It's not swagger, it's stability. And in a world full of noise, that kind of silence draws attention without asking for it. She wasn't reacting to your words. She was responding to your absence of desperation. Most men radiate hunger, a kind of emotional reaching that can't be hidden with confidence or charisma. But when you withhold your essence, not in fear, but in quiet self-command, you create space. And in that space, people feel drawn to you without knowing why. Testosterone rises. That's true. But what really shifts isn't your hormones. It's your relationship with need. You stop reaching for something to fill you. You start standing in what you've already built. And when a man is full of his own presence, women notice, not because he's louder, but because he's anchored. They ask if you're seeing someone, not because of your words, but because of your weight. They assume you're taken, not by another woman, but by your own self-respect. And that assumption is right. You've been claimed, not by ego, but by the man you refuse to abandon. And that energy, that quiet possession of self, is what they can't ignore. You didn't change your image. You changed your current, and that current pulls even in silence. Especially in silence. Most men think power is in action, in movement, in proving something. But real power, the kind that makes others pause when you enter a room, lives in your stillness. It's what you don't say. It's what you don't do. It's what you're willing to hold without breaking. That's what Nofap trains, not just in body, but in nervous system. The ability to feel tension and not run from it. You used to react to the urge, to the trigger, to the thought that whispered, just one more time. You didn't pause. You obeyed. And each time you did, you handed away a piece of your authority. Not because you were weak, but because you never learned how to hold the fire without trying to put it out. But now you see it differently. Now, every withheld reaction becomes a quiet rite of passage, a ritual of self-command. The Stoics called it apatheia, not apathy, not indifference, but a calm sovereignty over your inner world. It's not that you don't feel, it's that you don't collapse under what you feel. You breathe through it. You stand with it. You let the moment pass like a storm that no longer defines the weather inside you. And that practice becomes presence. It becomes weight. It becomes a calm intensity that needs no explanation. You don't become a man by reacting. You become a man by containing, by choosing when to speak, when to act, and when to stay silent. Not out of fear, but out of mastery. There's power in the pause, in the breath you take when everything inside you screams for release, and you answer with stillness. There's strength in the decision to remain unmoved, not because you're numb, but because you're anchored. Every time you feel the old pull and choose to stay, you remember who you are, not a slave to craving, not a servant to emotion, a man, present, grounded, untouched by the storm that used to command him. And in that moment, you don't just reclaim power, you become it. People misunderstand. They think Nofap means fear of sex, rejection of pleasure, denial of the body, but they're wrong. This isn't about rejecting anything. It's about remembering who decides. It's about returning to the throne of your own mind and asking, quietly but clearly, who's leading here? The craving or the man? You were never meant to be ruled by hunger. Desire is part of you, but it's not meant to own you. And when it does, when you live at the mercy of urges you can't control, you stop being free. You stop being present. You stop being whole. And every time you give in without question, you give up something sacred, the ability to direct your life instead of being dragged through it. Celibacy isn't the goal. Control is. Control not as repression, but as awareness. The awareness to choose, not from fear, not from guilt, but from presence. The man who abstains because he's scared is not free. The man who engages with purpose, from fullness, not need, is the one who carries real power. Zeno didn't teach avoidance. He taught alignment. He didn't say, run from pleasure. He said, own your response to it. You're not escaping women. You're not rejecting intimacy. You're refusing to trade your essence for a moment of forgetfulness. You're done leaking your fire to things that leave you emptier than before, because the man who holds his energy is not avoiding life. He's preparing to live it on his terms. He's not hiding from connection. He's building the capacity to offer something deeper than performance, presence. And presence is born from mastery, not indulgence, not fear, not shame, but self-command that says, I choose when, I choose how, I choose why. This path isn't about monkhood. It's about returning to yourself, not as an idea, but as an authority. The man who no longer flinches at his own hunger, because he knows he holds the reins. Zeno didn't rebuild his life in celebration. He rebuilt it in collapse. When the ship went down, so did the version of himself that was dependent on circumstance. What rose from the wreckage wasn't louder. It wasn't more successful. It was more aligned, more anchored. That's what this journey is. Not a trend, not a technique, a return. A return to the man you left behind when comfort became your quiet addiction. You didn't choose Nofap to feel superior. You chose it because something inside you had enough. Enough of being ruled, enough of living in cycles, enough of standing in mirrors and wondering where your presence went. This isn't about semen retention. It's about soul retention. It's about no longer letting your fire be traded for a few seconds of escape. It's about dignity, not the kind people notice. The kind only you can feel when you close the door behind you and breathe without regret. Seneca said, no man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself. You're not here to stay comfortable. You're here to remember how to carry weight, how to lead without noise, how to contain without suppressing, how to command without chasing. That's not celibacy. That's manhood. You are not a man because of what you do. You're a man because of what you hold and how you hold it. And the moment you stop leaking your fire, you begin to feel it again. Not in the eyes of others, not in applause, in silence, in breath, in the quiet certainty that you are no longer abandoning yourself. You are the ember under ash, dormant but not dead. And every urge you resist, every breath you hold, every impulse you deny, that's not sacrifice. That's the match to your fire. And what burns from here is yours. Don't leave this video to try something. Leave it to re-inhabit yourself. As a man who no longer escapes what he was born to carry. As a man who, like Zeno, chooses to begin right from where everything fell apart.